I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you because you deserve to know. My wife confessed she was cheating with her boss, then demanded our $340,000 house to build their new life. She thought I was quietly accepting the end of our 8-year marriage. At her family birthday party, her own voice suddenly filled the backyard. My name isn't important. What's important is what I do for a living, because it matters later. I'm an accountant. Have been for 11 years. I don't lose receipts. I don't misplace numbers. I don't forget dates. It's not a personality trait I chose. It's just how I'm wired. My wife used to say I was the kind of guy who'd build a fallout shelter before anyone else knew there was a storm coming. She meant it as a criticism. I took it as a compliment. Belinda and I met 8 years ago. She was sharp, funny, ambitious in a way I found attractive back then. We built something real, or I thought we did. I paid the mortgage on our home, a $340,000 place we bought in year 3. I financed her MBA program, $22,000 over 2 years, because she said the degree would open doors. Both cars were under my name. I wasn't keeping score. That's just how it worked out. The doors did open. Belinda got a better title, a better salary, and about 14 months ago, a new boss. His name was Donovan Voss. I heard that name for the first time at dinner, a Tuesday in October, mentioned casually between the pasta and the second glass of wine. My new director is brilliant, she said. He really gets the team. I nodded, filed it away. Over the following weeks, Donovan Voss became a recurring character in our dinner conversations, always with a new adjective. Brilliant became visionary. Visionary became inspiring. I noticed the pattern. I didn't say anything. I should have started the spreadsheet a lot earlier. The late nights started around month 4. 2 evenings a week, then 3. I didn't interrogate her. I'm not that kind of husband. What I did do quietly, without comment, was open our joint credit card statement one Sunday morning with a second cup of coffee and read it carefully. What I found was interesting. Ember Lounge. $87, then $112, then $94, 3 separate Fridays, none of which Belinda had mentioned. An Uber surge from a downtown address at 1:30 inches the morning on a night she said she'd worked late and taken a cab home. A Sephora order for $160 delivered to her office. I opened a new Excel workbook that afternoon. I named it Household Expenses Q3. That is not what it was. By October, it had 47 rows. By December, it had a tab labeled Legal. So, back to that night. After she went upstairs, I sat on the couch and waited. Not because I was hoping she'd come back down and apologize. I waited because I knew Belinda. When she had something to say, she always came back down. She did. 20 minutes later, glass of wine in hand, she settled into the armchair across from me like she was about to have a business meeting she'd already won. I didn't speak first. I never do. I've been thinking a lot lately, she said. About what I need. About what this marriage has been giving me and what it hasn't. She paused for effect. Donovan understands me in ways I didn't know I needed. We've been seeing each other for about 4 months now. She said it cleanly, the way you'd announce a job promotion. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you because you deserve to know. I looked at her. How long has this been going on? 4 months, she repeated. Like I hadn't heard her the first time, like repetition was clarification. And you're telling me now because I'm done pretending. She leaned back. I thought you'd be more upset. I'm processing, I said. That seemed to satisfy her. She talked for another 40 minutes. Details I won't repeat here, but she gave them freely: the bar they went to, how she felt, what Donovan said about his own marriage. She wasn't confessing, she was narrating. There's a difference. A confession carries some weight of regret. What Belinda was doing was something closer to a victory lap. At some point she said, "You always make everything so complicated. Why can't you just let people be happy?" I nodded slowly. "You're right," I said. "I should stop complicating things." What she didn't know was that my phone was on the coffee table, screen down, record function running since 11:04 p.m. By the time she finished talking, I had 22 minutes of clean audio. I later named the file Belinda, Confession, NAV14, M4A. She went to bed. I opened my laptop and renamed a spreadsheet tab. I woke up at 5:30 the next morning. Made coffee. Sat down at the kitchen table while the house was still dark and Belinda was still asleep upstairs, and I opened the laptop. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't acting out of rage. I wasn't spiraling. I was doing what I always do when a problem presents itself. I was building a document. Tab 1 joint asset inventory, every property, every vehicle, every account we held together. Tab 2, the credit card irregularities, cross-referenced against the dates. Belinda said she was working late. Tab 3, attorney research, 3 names, sorted by their track record in fault-based divorce cases in our state. I named the folders sitting on my desktop Operation Bye Bye Belinda. Not out of bitterness, I just needed something to call it, and that felt accurate. By 8:15 a.m. I had an appointment. Her name was Joanna Calloway, 11 years in family law, known specifically for cases where one party had documentation and the other had excuses. The consultation cost $350 for the first hour. I paid cash. When I sat down across from her and explained the situation, she asked me one question before anything else. How much documentation do you have? I turned my laptop toward her. She was quiet for a long moment, scrolling. Then she said, "Okay, good." Joanna told me to keep behaving normally at home. Same routine, same tone, nothing that could be framed later as harassment or retaliation. I told her I'd been doing that for 4 months already. She didn't laugh, but she came close. That same afternoon, I started pulling on a different thread. Joanna had suggested a background check on Donovan Voss standard procedure, she said, when the third party had financial overlap with a marital estate. What I found went further than I expected. Through public filings and a quiet conversation with a former colleague at Donovan's previous firm, a pattern emerged. 2 documented HR settlements at prior employers, both involving personal relationships with direct reports. Both resolved quietly. Both expensive. The kind of history that doesn't make the LinkedIn profile but does make the discovery process very uncomfortable. Then I found the invoices. 3 of them, totaling $4,200, paid from Donovan's discretionary budget to a consulting entity I didn't recognize at first. I ran the registration number. The entity was filed under Belinda's maiden name, incorporated 6 weeks after the affair started. I stared at that for a while. I didn't know yet whether Belinda had set it up herself or whether Donovan had done it for her, and honestly, for the purposes of Tab 4, it didn't matter. Either way, it was on the record. I labeled the new tab Voss Financial Exposure and added it to the folder. Operation Bye Bye Belinda was now 4 tabs deep and growing. Karma, I was learning, doesn't always move fast. But when it moves, it doesn't stop. 2 weeks after the confession, Belinda sat me down at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning. She had that look composed, rehearsed, the look of someone who'd been practicing a speech in the shower. She set her coffee mug down like she was calling a meeting to order. "I've talked to a lawyer," she said. "I think we should make this as clean as possible." Then she laid it out. She wanted the house. She wanted her car, the Audi, which, for the record, was registered under my name. She wanted half the joint savings, which at that point sat at $34,000. Her lawyer, she said, had told her she was in a strong position. She folded her hands on the table and looked at me like she was waiting for me to sign something. I let her finish. Then I said, "I'm sure your lawyer will find the discovery process very educational." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means the process of sharing documentation. Both sides." I kept my voice even. "It's standard." She stared at me for a second, then shook her head. "You always do this. You make everything so complicated. Why can't you do—" There it was again, the same line, almost word for word, like a script she'd memorized. Like if she said it enough times, it would become true and I would become the problem. My phone was on the table again. Screen down. Running since 6:48 a.m. I looked at her and said, "I hear you, Belinda. I'm thinking about consequences." She didn't like that word. I could see it land on her face just for a second before she rearranged her expression back into confidence. She pushed her chair back, picked up her mug, and said she expected to hear from my lawyer by the end of the week. I told her she would. What she didn't know was that Joanna had already filed. 3 days earlier. The petition cited marital fault under our state's provisions, adultery, documented. Belinda's strong position was built on the assumption that this was going to be a no-fault split down the middle. It wasn't. 3 days after that Tuesday morning, a plain envelope arrived at my office. No return address. Inside was a thumb drive. I plugged it in, opened the folder, and went through it methodically the way I go through everything. The private investigator I'd hired 11 days after the confession had been thorough. On the drive, exterior camera footage from Ember Lounge, dated November 9th. Belinda and Donovan arriving together at 8:23 p.m. Leaving together at 1:22 a.m. A second clip from level 3 of the parking garage adjacent to Donovan's office building, November 12th, timestamped, confirming what the Ember Lounge footage had only implied. A log showing Belinda's vehicle at that same garage on 4 additional dates, each one corresponding to a night she'd told me she was working late. The PI's invoice was $1,850. I added it to a new line in the spreadsheet, tab 5, legal costs recovery. If the settlement went the way Joanna expected, Belinda would be contributing to that tab whether she knew it or not. I watched the footage once. Then I forwarded everything to Joanna and went to bed. Clarity, I've found, doesn't require you to dwell on things. It just requires you to see them clearly, file them correctly, and move forward. 3 weeks before the hearing, Joanna sat down with Belinda's attorney and handed over the documentation package. I wasn't in the room for that meeting. I didn't need to be. Joanna called me afterward and gave me the summary in about 4 sentences, which is one of the things I appreciated about her she didn't editorialize. The package contained the following. Exhibit A, Belinda, Confession, Nav 14, M4A. 22 minutes of audio, fully transcribed, timestamped, legally obtained in a one-party consent state. Exhibit B, the Ember Lounge footage and the parking garage clips, with the PI's signed affidavit and the full date log of Belinda's vehicle. Exhibit C, the text chain between Belinda and Donovan Voss, all 47 exchanges, printed and tabbed. The one that opened the tab was a message Donovan sent on a Thursday afternoon in September. It said, "You make spreadsheets sexy." Belinda had replied with a laughing emoji and 3 words I won't repeat here. That exchange was on page 1, highlighted in yellow, because Joanna has a sense of humor about these things. The financial disclosure appendix ran 11 pages. 203 line items. Every Ember Lounge charge, every Uber surge, every Sephora delivery, the 3 invoices paid to Belinda's maiden name consulting entity, all of it, annotated, sourced, cross-referenced. The spreadsheet I had started on a quiet Sunday morning as household expenses Q3 had become, without any dramatic transformation, a legally binding financial document. She once told me I spent too much time on spreadsheets. Turns out, that was exactly the right amount of time. Belinda's attorney requested a 2-week continuance after reviewing the package. In legal terms, a continuance request at that stage means one thing. Your client was not prepared for what they just saw. Joanna called it a productive development. I called it Tuesday. Then the second front opened. The consulting invoice irregularities, those 3 payments totaling $4,200 from Donovan's discretionary budget to Belinda's maiden name entity, had been flagged during discovery and cross-reported to Donovan's company compliance department. Joanna's office had standing to do so, and she exercised it without drama, the way you'd file any routine paperwork. Donovan's company opened an internal audit the following week. I found out what happened next, not from Joanna, but from a former colleague of mine who worked in the same industry. On a Wednesday morning, Donovan Voss was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the audit. By Thursday, his name had been quietly removed from the company's website. The bio page that had called him visionary and listed his 11 years of leadership experience was replaced with a standard placeholder, the kind that says nothing and means everything. Belinda didn't know yet. As far as she knew, she was navigating a difficult divorce while building a future with a brilliant, well-compensated director who understood her in ways I never had. She was making plans. She had opinions about apartments. She'd mentioned, in passing, that Donovan had talked about taking her somewhere warm in the spring. I knew something she didn't. Karma is not emotional. It doesn't hold grudges, and it doesn't celebrate. It's actuarial. It catches up at the most statistically predictable moment, with the most statistically predictable consequences. Donovan Voss had a documented pattern, a compliance violation, and an administrative leave status that wasn't going to resolve in his favor. She was planning a future with a man who no longer had a job. Her lawyer called Joanna 2 days later and used the word reconsider. That word, in the context of a fault-based divorce with 203 documented line items and a text chain filed as Exhibit C, meant everything. 3 nights before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. That doesn't happen to me often. I'm the kind of person who makes a list, closes the laptop, and sleeps fine. But that night I sat at the kitchen table at 3:17 inches the morning with a cold cup of coffee, and I ran a different kind of calculation. Not legal, not financial, just 8 years. I let myself do the math on 8 years. The trip to New Orleans in year 3, when we got lost in the French Quarter for 2 hours and she laughed the whole time. The way she used to read on Sunday mornings with her feet tucked under her on the couch. The version of Belinda that existed before Donovan Voss became a recurring character at the dinner table. I sat with all of that for about 60 seconds, maybe a little longer. I'm not going to pretend it didn't cost anything, because it did. 8 years costs something even when the ending makes sense. Then I closed the window. Not because I was suppressing anything, but because clarity doesn't require grief to be permanent. The marriage had been over for longer than 14 months. I wasn't ending something that was alive. I was filing the paperwork on something that had already gone cold. There's a difference, and knowing that difference is what let me sleep eventually. What brought me fully back was a practical thought. Belinda's 36th birthday was 2 weeks after the hearing. Her parents were hosting a backyard party, the kind they did every year. String lights, catered food, the whole extended family. My parents had been invited. Her colleagues from work had been invited. And Belinda, I had learned through a passing comment from her mother, had invited Donovan Voss as her guest. Her special guest. Her mother had said it with a kind of careful neutrality that told me everything about what the family actually thought and nothing about what they were willing to say out loud. I made a note. Not because I was planning anything dramatic. Because I had one last receipt to deliver, and that backyard was going to be the right room for it. The logistics were simple. Belinda used a portable Bluetooth speaker at every family gathering, a JBL, Flip 5, dark gray, always sitting on whatever table was nearest the food. I had bought it for her 2 Christmases ago. I had also set it up, which meant I knew that it was still paired to my old tablet, the one sitting in the drawer of my home office that Belinda had never touched and never thought about. I tested the connection that Thursday evening. Range, 30 feet. Audio quality, clean. I tested it twice more on Friday. Both times, clear. The party was in her parents' backyard. I knew that yard. I had stood in it at a dozen gatherings over 8 years. I could walk it in my head, the table near the back fence, the string lights strung between the 2 oak trees, the general area where the speaker would sit. I didn't need a diagram. I just needed to be within 25 feet, and I needed the tablet in my jacket pocket. I labeled my notes without any irony at all, tab 6. The hardest part, I already knew, wasn't going to be the plan. It was going to be keeping a straight face at the candles. The hearing was on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, it was over. I won't spend much time on the courtroom itself because courtrooms are not dramatic places. They're fluorescent and procedural, and they smell like old carpet. What happened inside that room was simply this. Joanna presented the documentation package to a judge who had seen everything and was impressed by very little, and the judge reviewed it, and the settlement was granted in my favor on fault grounds. The house, $340,000 market value, fully mine. Both vehicles, both under my name already, now uncontested. $28,500 from the joint savings, after legal costs, which the settlement required Belinda to partially cover. Belinda's attorney did not appeal. There was nothing to appeal with. I drove home, made dinner, and went to bed early. The party was in 2 weeks. Her parents' backyard on a Saturday evening looks the same every year. String lights between the 2 oak trees. A long folding table along the back fence with more food than anyone needs. The kind of gathering where everyone is 2 drinks in by 7 and someone always ends up telling a story they've told before. I arrived at 6:15. My parents were already there. Belinda's mother hugged me at the gate with the same careful warmth she'd been using for the past month, the hug of a woman who knew something was wrong and had decided not to be the one to say it. I appreciated that about her. There were 22 people in that backyard. I counted without meaning to. The JBL Flip 5 was on the table near the back fence, exactly where I expected it. Dark gray, 92% battery. I checked the tablet in my jacket pocket at 7:43 p.m. Connected, clean signal. Donovan Voss arrived at 6:40 with a bottle of wine and the relaxed confidence of a man who had no idea that his administrative leave status was about to become the least of his problems. Belinda introduced him to her aunts, her cousins, her father's old colleagues. She had her hand on his arm the whole time. She was radiant. She was 36 and stepping into the life she was meant to live, and she wanted everyone in that backyard to see it. At 7:30, Belinda tapped a glass and gave a small speech. She thanked her parents for always showing up. She thanked her friends for their support through a difficult period. She said this year had taught her that she deserved to take up space to stop shrinking and start living. She said she was grateful for the people who understood that. She looked at Donovan when she said it. He smiled back. Several people wiped their eyes. I stood near the oak tree on the left, about 23 feet from the speaker, and I smiled too. She raised her glass. The backyard raised theirs. I pressed play. The music cut. For about 2 seconds, there was the ambient sound of a room, the specific quality of silence that happens when background noise stops and people haven't registered why yet. Then Belinda's voice came through the speaker, clear and close, the way a voice sounds when it's been recorded in a quiet living room at 11 o'clock at night. He makes me feel things you never did. 4 months, and I don't regret a single night. Nobody moved. Then, 14 seconds later, her voice again warmer, a little lower, saying Donovan's name the way you say someone's name when you're not thinking about who might be listening. Then a question, from off recording, "Are you recording this?" Then Belinda's voice, laughing, "Who records their husband?" I let 90 seconds play. That was enough. That was more than enough. I stopped the audio. The backyard was completely silent. Belinda's mother had set her wine glass down on the table very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands aren't entirely steady. Belinda herself was standing near the birthday cake with both arms at her sides, and her face had passed through several expressions and landed on something I didn't have a word for. Donovan Voss was looking at the speaker, then at Belinda, then at the general direction of the gate. Belinda's father, a man named Reed Hargrove, retired contractor, not someone who raises his voice, stood up slowly from his chair, looked at Donovan, and said, quietly and without any particular drama, "Son, I think you should leave." Donovan left. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then someone set a glass down. Then 2 people started talking at once. I stayed where I was, near the oak tree, and I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The spreadsheet had already spoken. Belinda stood there holding her birthday cake. The candles were still burning. In the weeks that followed, things resolved the way things do when the documentation is solid and the other side has nothing left to argue with. The divorce settlement stood. The house was mine. Both vehicles were mine. $28,500 from the joint savings, minus legal costs. The net figure landed in my account on a Tuesday morning with no fanfare and no drama, which is exactly how financial justice should arrive. Belinda was required by the settlement to cover a portion of the legal fees. I added the final figure to tab 5 and closed the row. Donovan's internal audit concluded the way audits conclude when someone has been routing company funds through a maiden name consulting entity for 6 months. He was terminated. His company filed a recovery demand for the $4,200 in fraudulent invoices, plus additional findings that were not disclosed publicly but that I imagine made for an uncomfortable few weeks. His LinkedIn profile went quiet. The bio that had called him visionary disappeared entirely. I did not check it more than twice. Belinda moved into a 2-bedroom apartment with a friend from work. She did not post on social media for 3 months. Not a photo, not a caption, not a check-in. For someone who had previously documented every restaurant and every mood and every small personal triumph, that silence said more than any post could have. I didn't post anything either. I had nothing to announce. The work was done. 6 days after the birthday party, I sent Belinda one final message. No text. No explanation. Just a PDF attachment, the finalized divorce decree, signed and filed. I sent it at 8:47 inches the morning. The delivery receipt showed it was opened at 9:14 a.m. I know because I looked once, out of habit, the way you check a spreadsheet after you've submitted it, not because you expect errors, but because completion deserves acknowledgement. She didn't reply. I didn't expect her to. I've thought about what to call what happened over those few months. It wasn't revenge. Revenge requires heat, and I never felt hot about any of it. It wasn't even satisfaction, exactly, though I won't pretend there wasn't some of that in the quieter moments. What it was, more than anything, was consequences. Not the kind you manufacture or wish for, the kind that arrive on their own schedule, in their own order, because someone made a series of choices and every choice has a row in the ledger whether you put it there or not. Karma doesn't need an audience. Consequences don't need your permission to arrive. And clarity, real clarity, doesn't need the last word. It just needs to be accurate. I closed the laptop, made coffee, went to work. Some people call that moving on. I call it the next row.